There have been concerns among Republicans that Jack Smith overreached, that he was politicized. There have been concerns among Democrats that this judge was slow-walking the case, dragging it out well beyond the 2024 election. And now this Judge Eileen Cannon, who held hearings on small-bore things that would otherwise have moved swiftly, who had a series of delays and long waiting periods before issuing earlier decisions, has just knocked the case down. It's gone. And I've talked to a few sources over the past few minutes who say this is not surprising. This is shocking.
Scott, thank you very much. Stand by for just a second. Jan Crawford covers the Supreme Court for us. She's on the phone now. Jan, good morning to you. You heard that Scott just said this is not surprising. This is shocking. What do you say?
Well, yes. And I mean, I think that's because generally for the past 20 or so years, it's understood that these special counsels were lawful, that these kind of prosecutions could proceed. But Judge Cannon, in her ruling, says that it violates the Constitution, that he should have been funded, as Scott said, a different way, and she's dismissing this case. Why I think it's not entirely shocking, though, is that Justice Clarence Thomas flagged this as an issue in another Trump case, the January 6th case, when the Supreme Court ruled that Trump does not have absolute immunity from prosecution. Justice Thomas wrote a separate concurring opinion that is in many ways a roadmap of sorts, flagging the issue that he believes the special counsel Jack Smith's appointment was unconstitutional. Now, what does this mean? What's the bottom line? It means, of course, there will be no classified documents trial, but there was not going to be one before November anyway. But it is also potentially significant for the January 6th trial and whether Judge Chutkan can go forward with that trial. Trump's lawyers did not file for this hearing in that case, did not make this motion that the special counsel was unconstitutional, but they are certain to file those papers now. And so that will further complicate any efforts to have a trial in the January 6th case before November, Dale.
A very big break for Donald Trump today. Thank you, Jan. CBS News legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor, that's Jessica Levinson, joins us now. Good morning to you, Jessica. What's your reaction to hearing this decision?
I am surprised, but exactly as Jan Crawford just said, this is something that Justice Thomas telegraphed in that case that we all got to talk about, dealing with whether or not former President Trump has some or absolute immunity from criminal prosecution. This is something that Justice Thomas brought up during the oral arguments, where all of a sudden he says, you know, I think maybe we should talk about the special counsel and how the special counsel was appointed. Then he mentions it again in a separate opinion. I will say I am surprised because my understanding is that the weight of authority goes against this, meaning most judges assume that the appointment of a special counsel, the way Jack Smith was appointed, does in fact comply with the appointments clause. And we're really talking about a provision of the Constitution that tells us how you can appoint certain people, meaning, is this something where you need the advice and consent of Congress? Or is this a situation where Congress can say to a president, you have the power to do this on your own? And what Judge Eileen Cannon is saying this morning is that, in fact, that we don't have the power, that he was not appointed through the proper channels. She also says there's a problem with how his position was funded. She didn't get to that because she said, well, we're going to dismiss this with respect to the appointments clause only. I am surprised, I will say, incredibly lucky break for the former president.
Jessica, does it raise any questions about Judge Eileen Cannon? There seemed to be some concern earlier on in this case whether she had the experience or whether she was over her skis in this particular case. What are your thoughts on that?
So my thoughts are that Donald Trump got a judge who was very much willing to hear all of his arguments. So even when she ruled against him, she would hold hearings on issues like this one regarding the appointment of a special counsel. I will say that another federal judge, I think, would look at how we appoint special counsels, would look at our pattern and practice and say, we don't have to hold a hearing on that. But you have Judge Eileen Cannon saying, yes, we'll hold a multi-day hearing on that. And this is not the only instance. We've seen other instances where Judge Eileen Cannon has essentially paused the trial in order to consider a variety of different arguments that former President Trump has put forward, she actually put this case on kind of an indefinite question mark in the sense that she took it off calendar. So Judge Eileen Cannon, I will just say, is a judge that the Trump team had to be very excited about getting, because at the very least, she entertained all of these questions, and that was a win for him up until this point. Now we have a huge win for him in this case being dismissed.
And the timing of it also couldn't be more perfect for him. Let's go back to Scott McFarland, who's been covering the Trump case. Scott, what role did Congress play in all of this?
The president's allies in Congress, his fellow Republicans, were trying to knock this case down for him. They had made all these efforts over the past few months to defund the special counsel, to zero out the money his office uses to prosecute the cases. They needn't do so anymore on this case because Judge Cannon has done it for them. There still is that January 6th case Jack Smith has in Washington, which has faced all kinds of complications due to the former president's appeals. This is likely to be another complication, and the prospects of that going to trial before November were already particularly slim. They may now be invisible. And just to button this up, you may ask yourself, well, how did a Trump-appointed judge, Judge Eileen Cannon, so new to the bench, get this case, this heavy, historic case? The federal court system uses something they call a wheel, which is a term basically to say it's a raffle. They're picking a name out of a hat, so to speak, to choose the next judge up. But where the case was filed, in that part of that district of Florida, there are very few judges on the wheel. The odds were not small that the case would fall to Judge Eileen Cannon. It's in her hands, and she has made quite a striking decision today.
Scott McFarland, thank you very much. Do you think this will affect the other cases, the other outstanding cases against Donald Trump? I know it's in in another state, but do you think that this will have any effect on that?
The Washington, D.C. case is being brought by the same prosecutor. Easily can foresee former President Trump's lawyers trying to mechanize this ruling up in Washington, D.C. to throw more spokes in the wheel. But it's also a more fundamental issue here. You know, we're at a moment, as I stand here in Pennsylvania, where we're being urged to take the temperature down. Let's take the heat out of our politics. Judge Eileen Cannon, for whatever reason, has just struck a nerve. People have been concerned the former president is going without accountability for allegedly mishandling and having classified records he was not supposed to have. It's making it harder to tamp down the passions when a ruling like this comes down.
All right, a lot of questions today. Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you very much. Just a quick recap of the breaking news that we started telling you about at the top of the hour. The federal judge in the classified documents case against former President Donald Trump in Florida has just dismissed the prosecution because of concerns over the appointment of the prosecutor. That would be Jack Smith. Our coverage will continue on our streaming network, CBS News 24/7, and on your local news, and of course tonight on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell. Many of you will now return to CBS Mornings, and this has been the CBS News Special Report. I'm Gayle King, here in New York.
All right, folks, you've been watching a special report on our breaking news. A judge that was appointed by former President Donald Trump has just dismissed the classified documents case against the former president. Following this and more from Milwaukee is our political correspondent, Caitlin Huey-Burns. She is outside of the Republican National Convention, which is getting underway. So, Caitlin, we were talking about this before the special report. Again, the reporting is, it's not exactly clear how Jack Smith is going to respond to this, but as you heard from our legal contributor, Jessica Levinson, who we're going to be speaking to in just a little bit, this did come as a surprise. But perhaps the Trump campaign, for them, it's a welcome surprise.
A welcome surprise indeed. And again, Vlad, we're still waiting to hear any official word, which we'll likely hear soon from the campaign, but no doubt taking this as a win because this was a significant case, as you just heard outlined there. Of course, there have been 4 cases laid out against Donald Trump, 2 in the states and 2 federal cases. This was a very serious one and something that a lot of Republicans had been concerned about. Now, there are going to be questions coming, especially from Democrats, about where is the level of accountability for the former president then. So we're waiting to see kind of what that looks like. But given that the assassination attempt is hovering over all political conversation right now, how you navigate that kind of messaging remains to be seen. We talk about a lot over the past several years how we're often in kind of unprecedented territory. This certainly is one of those moments as well.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns for us outside of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, where Caitlin, you and I had expected to talk about what is taking place today and over the next couple of nights. But this breaking news just happened, came into the CBS newsroom, so we're all over it. We'll speak to you a little bit later in the hour or throughout the day. Caitlin, as always, we appreciate you. Let us bring in one of my favorite CBS News contributors, CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson, who always is able to provide clarity around these very complicated legal issues. Jessica joins us now to break this breaking news down. So first of all, Jessica, I just want for people to understand the legal argument that Judge Aileen Cannon is making here. What is the Appointments Clause of the Constitution, and how is she applying it to this?
So the Appointments Clause is a part of the Constitution that tells us how we can appoint certain people to work in our government. And the question is essentially, is this the type of appointment where you need Senate confirmation? For instance, think about a federal judge where you need the advice and consent of the Senate. Or is this the type of appointment where Congress gives the president the authority to do this on his own? And what Judge Aileen Cannon is saying this morning is the way Jack Smith was appointed without the advice and consent of the Senate, that was improper, and that Congress that Congress had not empowered a president to create a special counsel. So that's number one with respect to the Appointments Clause, really saying that just the way we picked, not Jack Smith in particular, but the way we picked a special counsel to have the power to pursue this case, it was improper. Think about Merrick Garland, the Attorney General. He needs to be approved by the Senate, the advice and consent of the Senate. And so what Judge Aileen Cannon is saying here is that Jack Smith was not appointed through the proper channels. That's number one. Number two, she says there's a problem with how this office was funded. That's the Appropriations Clause. So we know that Congress has the power to spend money. Congress has the power of the purse. And she said, but I don't have to get into that really, because I already found that with respect to the Appointments Clause, there's a problem and the remedy is to dismiss. One thing, Vlad, I want to mention is this is typically something we don't talk about. I would say our general understanding is that special counsels are validly appointed and that you don't need to go, for instance, to the Senate for advice and consent. But what we heard during the oral arguments in the Supreme Court immunity case is Justice Clarence Thomas saying, maybe we should talk about how Jack Smith was appointed. And he brings up this appointments issue. He then writes separately in his opinion in the immunity case about this issue. I think he's really telegraphing to judges like Aileen Cannon, I think there's a problem here. She picked up on all of those crumbs. And today we have, I think, frankly, a fairly extraordinary decision.
So I don't know the history of, the detailed history of special counsels in American history, Jessica, but my mind is sort of wandering back to folks like Ken Starr or even Robert Mueller. Did Justice Thomas have an issue? I don't remember if I'm trying to think, he was, in the mid-1980s he would have been appointed to the Supreme Court. But did he have a problem when Ken Starr was investigating former President Bill Clinton? Did any member of the Supreme Court raise an issue with Robert Mueller? I'm just trying to understand if all of a sudden we have this coincidence that Justice Thomas highlights and sort of telegraphs to the rest of the judiciary that he has a problem all of a sudden with the way we appoint special counsels, which historically has not been a problem.
It's a really important question, and I'll kind of answer it and not answer it by saying this. The regulations or the law actually changed after Kenneth Starr. My understanding is that Kenneth Starr was actually an independent counsel, and there were some differences with respect to his purview and how he functioned. And then after that experience, we changed the law. So now Robert Mueller and Jack Smith are special counsels. So that's number one in the sense of, you're asking a really important question, which again is, well, why now? Why does this come up all of a sudden? So there were some differences. Now, were those differences that were big enough that if you see a constitutional question with the appointments clause, that you wouldn't bring it up? And the answer is, I don't know. Now, in addition, we didn't have a case that asked whether or not a president enjoyed immunity from criminal prosecution prior to this time, meaning, and again, really important question, but Justice Thomas didn't bring up this issue in a bankruptcy case or in a tax clause case. He brought it up in a case where the question was about a criminal prosecution that Jack Smith had brought the special counsel. So if you are going to bring it up, that was the moment to do that. So yes, I understand people can think, and I think there's, something there. Well, we've had special counsels or independent counsels for a long time. And I would say, yes, but maybe not the moment for the Supreme Court, or at least one Supreme Court justice, to say, I think I have an issue here. Frankly, that's why the immunity decision was a matter of first impression, because we had just never been there. Can a president be subject to criminal prosecution? Is there some or absolute immunity? And that's the moment when you would bring up a question like this.
All right, Jessica, stand by. I have a lot of other questions for you, including a little bit about who Judge Aileen Cannon is, her affiliation with the Federalist Society. But I want to bring in congressional correspondent Scott McFarland, who is standing by outside of the would-be assassin's home in Butler, Pennsylvania. He's been covering this documents case. Also joining me is CBS News legal contributor and attorney Katrina Kaufman. We're going to chat with her a little bit as well. But Scott, over to you first. So you just heard Jessica breaking down sort of the legal analysis of what this means and what it means going forward. Give us a sense of what this means politically for former President Trump.
The very moment in which there has been this public urging to tamp down the passions and cool things off, when Judge Cannon just struck a nerve with this ruling. This is a palpable, a visceral issue for so many people, because this is the first ever federal criminal case brought against a former U.S. president. That search of Mar-a-Lago happened 2 years ago next month, and the allegations are pretty damning that the former president had classified records knowingly that he wasn't supposed to have, had knowingly had records in a vulnerable place out there in Mar-a-Lago, which is visited by so many people. And there were concerns among Democrats and President Biden's supporters that Judge Cannon, a Trump appointee, was slow-walking this case, moving it so methodically, so diligently as to render it moot before the election, to make it impossible for there to be a trial before the election. She was under scrutiny for the way she was handling this case in the first place. Now she has dismissed the indictment altogether. Let's flip the coin over. Republicans have accused Jack Smith of politicizing his office, that he was appointed as a political motive to try to take down Donald Trump, the likely nominee in 2024. So Republicans have been trying to defund this prosecution through their tethers of the U.S. House and their control of the U.S. House. So Judge Cannon has just done more than that. She has knocked the case down in Florida. And Vlad, if I could impose, since we have Jessica, a question I'd love to ask her is, what impact this could have on the special counsel who has successfully prosecuted Hunter Biden in Delaware?
That is a great question. Jessica, let's toss it over to you, because we can do that here at CBS News 24/7. Did you hear that question from Scott?
I did hear that question. I was trying to race through Judge Aileen Cannon's 93-page ruling. And what I hear her saying is that with respect to this special counsel, the problem with the appointments clause is that Congress didn't give the authority for this appointment. And if that is the case, then I would say, yes, we are having a question about other special counsels as well. So obviously, Jack Smith was appointed, and he has pursued the D.C. election interference case and also this Mar-a-Lago case. But then you have to go back to other special counsels as well. Now, I should pause here and say, there could be a difference in the funding mechanism for the special counsel that was overseeing Hunter Biden. But to Scott's excellent question, I do think it calls into question the way we appoint and empower special counsels, period.
So, Scott, that's an interesting question as to whether or not this will apply to the special counsel investigating the president's son, Hunter Biden. The other question that I think that is going to be interesting to hear from your sources once they start reaching out to you, or once you start reaching out to them on the Hill, is we'd heard in the wake of this would-be assassination attempt on former President Trump's life that both the president, the former president, and members of the political class were going to try to tamp down some of the rhetoric. But when you see a very coincidentally timed decision on a very politically charged legal challenge that the former president is facing, does it give fuel to Democrats and members of Congress who are Democrats that look for people who are trying to make a decision about who to vote for in November? First, you have the Supreme Court ruling that the president, the office of the president, has almost all-powerful immunity protection from prosecution. And now you're dismissing charges that were very, very serious against a former president. If you're a Democrat, you're signaling this is the early signs of an imperial presidency should Donald Trump be reelected. Are we going to see again a shift where they say, look, we have to continue to attack the record, the policies that this former president is putting forth?
That's what's been fueling the political arguments before the assassination attempt, the Supreme Court ruling and this argument from Democrats that Donald Trump would be a dictator above the law. Not sure how they're going to navigate and negotiate that political argument in the wake of Saturday's shooting here in Pennsylvania. But this court order from Judge Eileen Cannon is right along that line.
All right, Scott McFarland for us. Scott, as always, we appreciate you, brother, doing double duty. We appreciate that so much. Thank you very much. We pointed to the fact that CBS News legal contributor and attorney Katrina Kaufman is joining this conversation. Katrina, you as well as Jessica have been reading this decision from Judge Cannon. You were inside the courtroom for all of these arguments. Was this the conclusion that you were expecting, having heard as an attorney, those arguments made in a courtroom?
Yes and no. Regarding the appointment of Jack Smith, I'm very surprised that she dismissed on this basis. Regarding the appropriations clause, which she talks about in this, she says that Jack Smith was wrongly funded through the permanent indefinite appropriation. That I'm not quite as surprised by, because she did seem very skeptical about where this funding was coming from, the fact that the way it was established has actually lapsed over time, the original law for that. And there was a lot of discussion about if they had to fund Jack Smith in a new way, how would the DOJ handle that aspect of it? So I'm less surprised by that, although she actually doesn't go as much into that aspect of this ruling, because she said since Jack Smith was unlawfully appointed, she doesn't even need to delve into her full reasoning behind the funding issue. But I am quite surprised, having been in that courtroom, heard those arguments, that this is where we are now. And just to go off of what you were just talking about, given the immunity ruling, and always this has been potentially one of the strongest cases against former President Donald Trump. This issue happened after he had left the presidency, so there are a lot of arguments that this immunity ruling would not apply here because it was post-presidency obstruction of retaining of classified documents. And now this case has been dismissed on the first day of the Republican National Convention. It feels very significant. Also, having read through this order a bit, there was part that struck me because you and Jessica were talking about historical precedent. And that was one of the arguments that we heard in that courtroom, that this is what's been done over time. This goes back to Nixon. Even under Trump himself, they appointed special counsels in this way. And she says that that history does not supplant the fact that there's not the textual basis for this appointment, and that there's just been an ad hoc pattern with little judicial scrutiny. So clearly Judge Cannon thinks that she is now applying that proper scrutiny to this issue.
So of course, the question then, Katrina, before we bring Jessica back into this discussion is, Is this case completely dead in the water if the ruling is that the special counsel was not appropriately appointed and that you would need the United States Senate to actually appoint a special counsel? Well, that can certainly happen, but it won't be before the election, obviously. And so the question is there enough political will to go through that process in an election year? Or is there some kind of mechanism that Jack Smith can employ to keep this investigation underway, or to keep the investigation going?
Jack Smith can absolutely appeal this to the 11th Circuit, and then it will be up to the 11th Circuit to decide whether they want to stay this ruling from Judge Cannon while they assess this issue. And I think we could see this elevated all the way to the Supreme Court. But as you said, it seems more and more unlikely that there's any way this case can move forward or begin before the election. So that in itself is significant and a pattern now with all of these cases.
All right, Katrina Kaufman for us. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it. Are we going back to Jessica Levinson or? All right, Jessica, I want to thank you as well for spending some time with us talking about this very, very important breaking news. We appreciate your analysis as always. Let's bring in congressional correspondent Nicole Killian, who's following this on Capitol Hill. Nicole, reactions from Congress.
Well, as you can imagine, particularly among congressional Republicans, more specifically, a number of House Republicans have already put out posts, praising this dismissal. Most notably, Congressman Jim Jordan, the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, calling this a big win for the former president. Of course, Chair Jordan had started a probe into the special counsel and this investigation in particular. And, we know House Republicans, as well as congressional Republicans writ large, had really been highly critical of the special counsel, accusing the Biden administration of lawfare against the former president for Jack Smith's investigation, as well as the number of other prosecutions against the former president. So I guess the question here on the Hill is whether or not congressional Republicans will stand down on some of their investigations or keep going. Obviously, we know that this decision will likely be appealed potentially or litigated further. But certainly for now, many Republicans consider this as a significant victory.
And so, Nicole, you probably heard, I don't know if you did, sort of the back and forth that we had with Scott and with Jessica Levinson about what this potentially could mean for other special counsels, including, obviously, the one investigating the president's son, Hunter Biden. Again, if you're an American and you're watching this and you're seeing, forget your political persuasion, but you're sort of seeing what many are calling the weaponization of the Justice Department, in which political opponents investigate each other, they investigate family members. If this is good for the goose, is it good enough for the gander?
Well, I think that's a big if, particularly when we talk about congressional Republicans. I mean, obviously, we know, for instance, that their impeachment inquiry of the president is still underway, although so far they have remained relatively quiet on that front. But, I would note just last week we saw the House fail to approve a resolution to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in inherent contempt. Of course, looking at the other side of the coin, this is congressional Republicans who continue to insist that they want the special counsel who interviewed President Biden, special counsel Robert Hur. They still are pursuing the tapes of that interview. They want more than just a transcript. So while that inherent contempt vote failed in Congress, in the House just last week, it is not necessarily quieting the calls among congressional Republicans to push for those tapes. Now, granted, this is a completely separate investigation from that of the former president, but also involving the issue of classified documents. So on one hand, while they may be praising this ruling by Judge Eileen Cannon, at the same token, does that mean they will now quiet their concerns with respect to the special counsel Robert Hur's investigation into President Biden? And while, yes, status concluded, again, we have seen Republicans repeatedly look for ways to try to push the Justice Department for those tapes, even though time and again the Justice Department has said that they are protected by executive privilege and that they are not going to pursue any type of charges against the Attorney General, despite the House's attempt to hold the Attorney General in contempt. Realizing that is separate from what is happening from Hunter Biden, I just use that as an example of how, there are two sides of this coin here when we talk about some of these special counsel investigations.
All right, Nicole Killian for us, reporting from Capitol Hill this morning. Nicole, as always, we appreciate you hustling to the camera for us with this breaking news. And in fact, we've got some news coming into the CBS News Broadcast Center. The former president has actually just posted the Truth Social, and I'm paraphrasing here. Actually, you can probably see it right behind me. No, right there, folks. There it is, coming into one of our newsrooms there, and I can't see which one it is, but they have been able to post that onto the air. I wonder if we can push in on that. Let's push in on that and show our viewers. Oh, there it is. All right. So that's what we're able to do here, right? Breaking news happening all across the newsrooms that CBS owns and operates stations, and if there's something happening, we can bring it up. There is that tweet or whatever they call it on Truth Social from the former president. The Justice Department coordinated all these political attacks, which are an election interference conspiracy against Joe Biden's political opponent, me. Let us come together to end all weaponization of our justice system and make America great again. So that is the former president responding to the fact that Judge Aileen Cannon in Florida has dismissed the classified documents case against him. Let's bring back Jessica Levinson to continue this conversation to talk about what this all means going down the road. Jessica, oh, all right. I'm told we lost Jessica Levinson. Well, let me then thank our contributors, Jessica and Katrina, and also thank our correspondents, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Scott McFarland, who hustled to a camera for us, including Nicole Killian, as the news came into the newsroom. Again, if you're just joining us here at CBS News 24/7, Trump has, well, at least the judge that was appointed by former President Donald Trump, has dismissed that classified documents case, which was, by many legal experts, one of the strongest legal cases against the former president. The fact that he had taken classified documents from the White House, from Washington, to his private residence at Mar-a-Lago. That case has now been dismissed by Judge Aileen Cannon. All right, back to our other top story this morning. Of course, we are learning more about the spectator who was tragically, horribly killed at that rally during the assassination attempt on former President Trump. His name, firefighter Corey Comparatori. Two others were also injured at the event. CBS News correspondent Meg Oliver is joining us now. Meg is joining us to talk about what we know about the victims, what we know that one person, Corey Comparatori, who was killed. Meg, many people are calling him a hero. He tried to shield his wife and his children. He was successful, but tragically, horrifically lost his life. And we know that there are others who are in the hospital who were injured on Saturday. What more can you tell us?
Vlad, good to be with you. Yes, the two other victims who remain here at Allegheny General Hospital include 57-year-old David Dutch, a former Marine corporal, and 74-year-old James Copenhaver. They are both still in critical but stable condition, so some good news there. And as you mentioned, the other victim, 50-year-old Corey Comparatori, he was killed, as witnesses say, trying to shield his wife and daughter from gunfire at the Trump rally. He was married to his high school sweetheart, Helen. They had two daughters. His wife went on and paid a beautiful tribute yesterday on Facebook, saying that he died the hero he always was. His daughter described him as a real-life superhero. He was also a veteran firefighter. He joined the Buffalo Township Fire Department in 1994. He retired a few years ago after becoming chief. And everybody there told me what an amazing guy he was. They are completely heartbroken. They described him as a family man, somebody who loved God. He went to church every week, and he would take his shirt off his back for his neighbor. They were completely shocked by this. And when I was there yesterday, he earned lifetime status, so his gear was still hanging in his locker, Vlad. And the running joke there at the fire department is that he has a last name that is very hard for a lot of us to say. It's Comparatori, and it's really long. So when they went to put his last name on his jacket, they told him you have to leave a vowel out. So they had to drop the A. That jacket now hangs in front of the fire department where there's a growing memorial. People have been stopping by in that community to leave flowers. Again, they're just simply heartbroken. Vlad?
You know what breaks my heart, Meg, about this story and the heroism of Mr. Comparatore is that he was doing what we should all be doing with our children, which is to engage them in the political process, to bring your children, to help the children understand what it is, the kind of candidate that you want to support. And it doesn't matter what your political affiliation is. We talk about in this country the lack of civics understanding that young people have. Here he is, Mr. Comparatore, bringing his family to a rally for the candidate that he was supporting and to help them understand. And it is something that we should all be able to exercise and tragically cut down while exercising his beautiful right as an American. And then to hear all these stories about what a great guy he was and the fact that he shielded his family from this horrific act. Thank you for sharing those details about his firefighter buddies, Meg, because I think it's important that we never forget what he did, Mr. Comparatore, before he was at that rally and during that rally to protect his family. Thank you, Meg. Okay, meanwhile, the FBI and local police say authorities are now on heightened alert for the start of the Republican National Convention, but there has been no known credible threat against the RNC itself or anyone visiting Milwaukee this week. Our Roxana Saberi is outside of the convention with the very latest. Roxana, talk to us about the police activity that you've witnessed in the time that you've been there.
Yeah, Vlad, the security's in full